When it comes to Minecraft random seed glitchless speedruns, there are 3 major versions that are accepted onto the leaderboards: 1.16, 1.14, and 1.7. While all of these speedruns end with the player killing the Ender Dragon, there is one major difference between all of these versions, that being how the player collects Ender Pearls. Ender Pearls are quite literally the single most important item in a Minecraft speedrun, as they are required to enter the End Dimension in order to defeat the Ender Dragon. The 3 main speedrun versions all obtain Ender Pearls in completely different ways, making for almost entirely unique speedruns. The 1.16 speedrun gets Ender Pearls through bartering with piglins, a neutral mob found in the Nether. By trading gold ingots, the player has a 4.73% chance of getting Ender Pearls in return. On the other hand, the 1.14 speedrun trades with villagers in order to obtain the Ender Pearls, usually by getting an absurd amount of wood, then trading sticks for emeralds, and then those emeralds for pearls. But 1.7 is definitely the odd one out compared to these other versions, as the optimal way to obtain Ender Pearls is just by straight up killing Endermen, who drop Ender Pearls upon death. So it begs a question: in Minecraft 1.7, how exactly do world record speedrunners get enough Ender Pearls from just killing Endermen? The player needs around 12 Ender Pearls to get to the End Dimension, and upon killing an Enderman, there is a 50% chance that you get a Pearl drop. This means that on average, you'd need to kill around 24 Endermen to complete the speedrun. This is a pretty absurd figure, as I'm sure if you were to go out in a casual Minecraft world and try to find 24 Endermen, it would take you much longer than the half-hour speedrunners normally take to beat the entire game. And this tall task is even more difficult when you consider that Endermen only spawn during the night. While you can rarely find Endermen in caves during any time of the day, the most reliable way to find Endermen is up on the surface during the nighttime. Minecraft days last around 20 minutes, and night only makes up around 9 minutes of that cycle. This means that for every 20 minutes of gameplay, we can realistically only spend 9 of those minutes trying to get Ender Pearls. When Minecraft random seed glitchless runs first started to gain popularity, it was mainly from a handful of Japanese runners. These runs were often played in hardcore mode, and used simplistic hunting strats to kill Endermen. Essentially, the player would run massive circles around a desert biome, and once they find an Enderman, the player would construct a small hidey hole in order to attack Endermen while staying completely safe from any attacks from hostile mobs. Even though the strategy seems fairly primitive, there is still some thought that goes into optimizing Enderman spawns. One major piece of the puzzle is the desert biome. Deserts are a dry biome. This is important because when it starts raining, Endermen will teleport away, making it impossible to hunt them. If the player is in a dry biome, it will never rain, so the player can always hunt Endermen without fear of bad weather. Additionally, deserts have no grass. Mobs cannot spawn on a block that has grass, so in the plains and savanna biomes, where there is a ton of grass, there are less places for Endermen to spawn, making it much more unlikely to find them. Because there is no abundance of grass in the desert, there are usually higher spawn rates for hostile mobs on the surface in the nighttime. This leads us to the idea of maximizing natural mob spawns. Even though it seems like a ton of hostile mobs can appear out of nowhere to gang up on you, there's actually a finite number of mobs that can naturally spawn. That number stands at around 70 hostile mobs, and more specifically, those 70 mobs have to be within a certain range of the player. Since we know that the amount of mobs that can spawn is limited, we don't want to take any mob spawn for granted, as any zombies, skeletons, spiders, creepers, or witches that spawn are taking up space that could be used to spawn Endermen. We now also know that the player should be moving at all times when hunting Endermen. By staying in one spot, the 70 mob spawn cap will quickly be reached, making it impossible for new Endermen to spawn. By continuously moving throughout the desert, the player will despawn unwanted hostile mobs, which allows new ones, hopefully Endermen, to spawn. Hunting strats are pretty straightforward, and while it worked for a lot of beginner runners, world record contenders struggled a ton with it. Specifically, a lot of challenge came from getting all of the necessary Ender Pearls in a single night. A lot of world record pace runs can completely flop due to poor spawn rates or drop rates from Endermen, so getting a world record pace run with hunting strats took a good amount of luck. But a common theme with speedrunning is that if anything requires a fair amount of luck, speedrunners will find a better, less random way around it. This is when Minecraft's most genius speedrun strategy comes into the picture, as instead of unreliable hunting strats, runners would start to utilize something known as tower strats. To get more specific into natural mob spawning, there's sort of an imaginary mob spawning sphere surrounding the player that has a radius of 128 blocks, meaning that if a mob is more than 128 blocks away from the player, that mob will despawn. Once one mob despawns, another mob will spawn anywhere within this 128 block sphere in order to satisfy the 70 entity cap. So theoretically, if we want to maximize the total amount of Enderman spawns, we need to despawn other mobs as fast as possible in order to allow new Endermen to spawn. Since mobs despawn when they are 128 blocks away from the player, we have to ask the question, what is the fastest way to travel 128 blocks in Minecraft? While there are many solutions here, most require resources that are just unreasonable to obtain in a speedrun. However, the most resource-efficient way to travel is actually by dying. After dying, hitting the respawn button will instantly teleport the player to their spawn point, no matter how far away it is. And combined with a bed, which only takes 3 wool and 3 wood to craft, the player can set their spawn point wherever they please. This is where the tower comes in. By building a tower that is 128 blocks tall and placing a bed on the top, the player can set their spawn point atop this pillar, meaning that upon any death, respawning would teleport the player back on top of this thin skyscraper. The base of this tower would consist of wooden slabs below some normal block, so that there is room to attack mobs outside of the tower without the mobs being able to attack the player. Inside of the tower, there is a chest to store the player's items, ladders or a block of water to break the player's fall from the top, and either lava or a fall damage trap to kill the player in order to respawn back at the top. Every time the player dies and respawns on top of the massive tower, all of the mobs on the floor of the desert will despawn, as the player is now 128 blocks above the desert floor. When the player drops down from the tower, brand new mobs will spawn on the floor of the desert. This is the fastest way to naturally despawn and respawn mobs in a Minecraft speedrun. In practice, the player can easily pick out Endermen from a sea of mobs, aggro the Endermen by looking at them, and then strike them down from the safety of the tower. The player can then die and respawn at the top of the tower to repeat the process. The tower made Enderman hunting incredibly simple, and much more consistent, as you are more likely to get all of the needed Ender Pearls in a single night. However, there were still a lot of logistical concerns with the tower, and top runners were initially hesitant to incorporate it into speedruns. For starters, building such a massive tower wasn't exactly instant. Tower construction times could take over a minute and a half, so it was definitely not a free time save. Additionally, speedrunners would need a lot of blocks in order to create the 128 block tall tower. Speedrunners would already use shears to get leaves, as that is the fastest block to mass produce in a speedrun. However, the tower required 2 to 3 times the amount of leaves that runners already got, and for some speedrunners, the time spent getting those extra resources just seemed like too much. Believe it or not, Japanese runners were the first to discover the tower strat, dating all the way back to January of 2015. However, the Japanese liked running on hardcore difficulty, where you couldn't respawn after a death. So that respawn button that was so crucial to the strategy didn't exist. Japanese runners viewed the tower as a meme strat used for co-op runs, reinforcing the idea that the tower didn't seem worthwhile for world record attempts. However, one Minecraft speedrunner named Cscuile thought otherwise. Cscuile was set on proving that tower strats were faster, and spent hundreds of hours refining the tower strat until ultimately creating a modern day tower design that could actually be consistently faster than hunting strats. Cscuile would be the first runner to attempt runs with the tower strat, and while his runs looked promising, it would take a different runner to really prove the tower's potential. That runner, Lide, had already had the world record for the random seed glitchless category with a 25-minute time, but after seeing Cscuile's tower strats, Lide knew the record could go much, much lower. Lide managed to get a run that used tower strats to perfection, so much so that he didn't even need the whole night to collect pearls, as 17 minutes into the run, with 2 minutes left in the night, Lide had already collected 12 pearls and started to book it towards the stronghold. After a clean Ender Dragon fight, Lide would clock in at 24 minutes and 56 seconds, the first ever sub-25 Minecraft speedrun on a random seed without glitches. With tower strats now in the picture, world record runs were completely different, as now it was much more rare to lose runs to bad Enderman spawns, but because of the tower's construction time, many runs would die from having slow nether segments in the daytime. But the tower strategy was still far from its final form, as there were still more developments to make the tower more efficient. The first optimization is something known as ledge strats. When the game spawns brand new mobs, it can take 5 to 10 seconds for all 70 of the hostile mobs to spawn. Because of this delay, mobs will continue to spawn once the player is on the floor of the desert, meaning that Enderman can potentially spawn 128 blocks away from the tower. This is a problem. In the worst case scenario, Enderman can spawn underground, and we won't be able to reach them. But even with better spawn RNG, we still might have to travel far from our tower in order to get to the Enderman. By creating a ledge with ladders near the top of the tower, the player can manipulate their imaginary mob spawning sphere so that it just barely encompasses the desert floor near the tower. By waiting here for a couple of seconds, mobs will only spawn at the edge of the circle, so almost all 70 mobs will spawn above ground, right next to the tower. While it seems unintuitive, as the player literally has to waste time on the ledge in the sky, the strategy does save time, as the player never has to travel far from their tower in order to find Enderman, making Enderman farming incredibly efficient. Another optimization was cutting down on the time spent killing Endermen. With the current tower design, a lot of time farming Ender Pearls is spent just hitting the Enderman with a sword. But surely this is unavoidable, right? Well, instead of a sword, we can use nature's most powerful weapon, gravity. Cscuile designed an improved version of the tower, called the Chaos Tower, that had a fall damage trap at the base. The design for everything on this tower is so incredibly precise, it's absurd. If the platform is one block lower, skeletons can shoot up at the player and cause trouble. If this block isn't at the side of the tower, spiders can climb up and pester the player. If there isn't lava here, mobs can spawn on the platform. And if there is a single block of dirt on the walls of the fall damage trap instead of stone, Enderman can pick it up and completely ruin the tower. There are so many small details that go into constructing this tower, but one of the most crucial details is building the tower out of sand. Because of the amount of sand needed, this strategy actually requires a world with a desert temple, because the TNT inside of the temple is used to blow up sand, which is the fastest way of collecting it in a speedrun. Since all of the Endermen fall into a hole, their Ender Pearls that they drop will also stay in that pit. When the player is done hunting Endermen for the night, they can get the pearls by clogging the hole with the sand from the tower, which will push all of the items in the pit to the surface, allowing the player to collect the pearls with ease. While the Chaos Tower takes almost 40 more seconds to build, if done properly, it can save a lot of time in a speedrun, as Enderman hunting basically becomes a game of I Spy, as just looking at Endermen and aggroing them will cause the hostile mob to fall into the trap just below the player, and potentially drop a pearl. This time, Cscuile took matters into his own hands, and showcased just how powerful the Chaos Tower really is. Cscuile managed to get a run that finished Ender Pearl farming at 16.5 minutes in, and he ultimately managed to convert this incredible pace into a new world record time of 23 minutes and 4 seconds, a time almost 1 minute faster than the previous world record. Today, there are so many variations of towers that it's very hard to say what tower design is the best. But all of these towers hold the same basic idea of setting your spawn point 128 blocks above the ground. Some of my favorite towers are Chaos Tower variations that are done on version 1.8 instead of version 1.7. Since the hostile mob AI is different on version 1.8, by using wooden doors, the player can very easily trick Endermen into falling down a fall damage trap, similar to that of Cscuile's Chaos Tower. But at the end of the day, all of these tower designs are most definitely faster and more consistent than the original Enderman hunting strategies. The only struggle is putting aside that classic fear of heights.